A finished film, $90 million spent, every frame complete. It was never released. On purpose, not because it failed, because destroyed, it was worth more than seen. The story you've heard goes like this. A century-old studio quietly buried its entire classic film vault, and somehow nobody noticed. It's a chilling headline. It's also wrong in every single particular, and the truth underneath it is colder than the lie. It wasn't quiet. What actually happened set off the loudest civil war Hollywood has seen in a generation. It wasn't the entire vault, because, as you'll see, that vault is alive and physically thriving right now in a place most people never think to look. And it wasn't a burial at all. Burial implies the body is gone. This was something stranger, a studio that looked at 100 years of its own cinematic history and decided that a great deal of it was worth more to shareholders erased from the market than shown to an audience. There is exactly one number that explains all of it, and it isn't a story about movies. It's a story about debt, tens of billions of it, and what a desperate company will do to its own legacy to survive. The vault wasn't buried, its accessibility was liquidated, and by the end, the studio doing the liquidating would be devoured whole. Let me show you how a century of art got turned into a line on a tax return. Start with the single most disturbing maneuver, because once you understand it, the rest of the story snaps into focus. There is a provision in the US tax code that lets a business claim a deduction when it abandons an asset, when it formally gives up ownership and pulls the property out of use entirely. It was written for failed factories and worthless inventory. The studio's new leadership realized it could be used on movies. So in the summer of 2022, just after a massive merger left the company drowning in debt, it did something that had essentially never been done at this scale. It took a nearly finished $90 million superhero film, cast, shot, nearly complete, and a completed animated feature, and it permanently shelved them. Not delayed, not sold. Abandoned in the legal sense, so the studio could write the entire production cost off against its taxable income. A finished movie converted into a tax deduction. The film's own lead actor called it the canary in the coal mine, a warning that the rules of the entire industry had just changed. And he was right, because it became a template. A year later, the studio did it again, this time to a beloved, fully completed hybrid of live action and animation built on one of its crown jewel cartoon properties, a film that had reportedly tested through the roof, slated for a $115 million write-down. Its director said publicly that to have the studio throw the work away for a tax write-off was a gigantic slap in the face. Think about what this establishes as policy. Under this logic, a movie isn't art, and it isn't even a product. It's an accounting position. And a completed, excellent film can be more valuable to a balance sheet dead than alive. Now let's kill the second piece of the myth, the part that says nobody noticed. The truth is the exact opposite. The reaction was deafening. Screenwriters publicly called the studio anti-art. Directors, actors, and the entire creative community erupted because for the first time, they understood that their finished work could simply be vaporized for a tax benefit no matter how good it was. And here's the remarkable part. The noticing actually worked. The backlash against shelving that second completed film grew so loud, so sustained, that the studio was forced into a humiliating reversal. It let the director take the film out and shop it to other buyers. And eventually, it found a home and a release date. That is not the behavior of a secret operation nobody saw. This was a public reckoning, fought out in real time, in the trade press and across every feed in the industry. The headline says it happened in the dark. It happened under stadium lights. But the shelved films were only the loudest part of the strategy. The quieter, larger part was happening to the library itself. Across late 2022 and into 2023, dozens of existing series, shows people loved, shows that had already aired, abruptly vanished from the studio's flagship streaming service. And the public did exactly what the headline assumes. They panicked, and they assumed the shows had been erased. They hadn't. This is the single most misunderstood move in the entire saga, so follow it carefully. Under industry contracts, as long as a show sits on a premium streaming platform, the studio has to keep paying residuals, ongoing payments to the actors, writers, and crew who made it. So when the data showed that an older series was no longer pulling in new subscribers, that show stopped being an asset and became a slow, compounding bill. Pulling it off the platform stopped that bill cold. But they didn't bury those shows. They demoted them. They turned around and licensed the very same series to free, ad-supported streaming channels, the kind that play between commercial breaks. So the show that used to cost you a monthly subscription is now available for free with ads on a different app entirely, a premium cost center converted into an advertising revenue stream. The content was never destroyed. It was moved down market, off the prestige shelf and into the bargain bin because the bargain bin paid better. And this brings us to the twist that detonates the headline completely. If you actually go looking for that supposedly buried classic vault, you'll find it. It's not in the ground. It's thriving. While the streaming side was being gutted, the studio's boutique physical media arm was quietly having a renaissance, meticulously restoring golden age films, pre-code cinema, and classic animation, releasing them on high-end disc with a slate of fresh restorations every year. Its own library historian has said the net revenue from that physical media business was significantly higher last year than the year before. Read that again. The classic vault isn't suppressed. It is one of the few parts of the operation that's growing. So why does it feel buried? Because the studio made a cold calculation. Old black and white films and vintage cartoons don't drive subscriptions on a flagship app, but they generate reliable, high-margin profit when sold directly to devoted collectors as a premium product. The vault wasn't locked away. It was simply moved behind a $25 disc and a specialty retail counter. You can absolutely still own these films, beautifully restored, better than ever. You just have to know they exist. Go find the right store and pay for them one at a time. And a generation raised to expect everything served instantly by an algorithm will never, ever stumble across them. That's not burial. It's something quieter and more permanent, removal from the path of accidental discovery. There's one more casualty worth naming because it shows how deep the logic went. For decades, the studio operated a beloved channel whose entire purpose was to give classic film its context, to present a century of cinema with expertise and reverence. In a cost-cutting sweep, the leadership that ran it was gutted. The curation itself had become a line item. It survived only because 3 of the most powerful living directors personally intervened, convening an emergency call to demand the programming be kept, in their words, untouched and protected. They won, for now, but sit with what that means. Preserving film history is no longer something a studio does because it's the right thing. It's an expense that has to be actively defended by the most famous artists alive, or it gets cut like anything else on the spreadsheet. And whether that protection survives the studio's new owners, nobody yet knows. So step all the way back, and there's that one number again. The merger that created this company left it carrying roughly $56 billion in debt. Every move you've just heard, the abandoned films, the purged library, the gutted curation, the exile to ad-supported channels, every single one was, at its core, an act of deleveraging. Strip the catalog for cash, cut the overhead, service the debt. And it worked, on paper. The debt fell by tens of billions, and it still wasn't enough, because a company that has publicly shown it will sacrifice anything to survive looks to the rest of the industry like wounded prey. The weakened studio became a target. First came a staggering hostile bid from the world's largest streaming company. Then a rival, newly consolidated and backed by a tech billionaire family, came over the top with an all-cash offer worth more than $110 billion and won. Federal antitrust regulators reviewed the deal and waved it through, concluding it would bring benefits for American consumers. And so the century-old studio that strip-mined 100 years of its own history to stay independent was bought and swallowed anyway. It liquidated its soul to save its life and then lost its life too. Now, in fairness, let me argue the other side. Because the people who did this were not cartoon villains, and the cold logic was painfully real. A finished film that's projected to lose money in release doesn't just sit there harmlessly. Releasing it actively burns capital on marketing and distribution. Abandoning it unlocks immediate tax savings, real cash, for a company that genuinely needed it to avoid a debt spiral in a brutal interest rate environment. The residual math is the same. A dead show on a premium platform bleeds money forever, and moving it to ad-supported channels turns a liability back into income. This is legal, defensible, fundamentally sound balance sheet management. The chief executive himself defended the cuts, saying the decision to scrap finished films took real courage. And to be precise about the facts, those abandoned movies weren't physically destroyed. The masters sit in deep cold storage for legal and audit reasons. They are shelved, not incinerated, but took real courage. To destroy other people's finished work for a tax break. That phrase is where the whole defense collapses. Courage is the wrong word for the safest financial move available to you. This wasn't bravery, it was arithmetic with a press release attached. And here's the thing the steelman can't dissolve. Sound accounting and cultural vandalism can be the very same act. When a system makes a completed film worth more as a deduction than as a movie, the problem isn't one ruthless executive. It's that we've built a machine that prices art exactly that way, and then acts surprised when the art loses. The studio did everything the spreadsheet asked. It survived its debt. It just didn't survive being the kind of company that would do all that to survive. And yet, notice what the noticing accomplished. Public pressure clawed one finished film back from the void and got it released. The artists saved the curation channel, at least for a while. The physical media renaissance proves something hopeful. When someone actually bothers to serve film history with care, an audience is right there, ready to pay for it. The art isn't gone, it's behind walls now. Walls of paywalls, ad breaks, regional locks, and corporate silos that decide what you're even allowed to find. Because the lesson here isn't despair, it's that these walls are built by people, and what people build, people can root around. Here's what should actually stay with you. The hard truth this whole saga exposed is that you don't own the films you pay to stream. You're renting access at the pleasure of a company that can decide overnight that your favorite movie is worth more to it deleted than delivered. Digital permanence was always a comforting myth. So the next time a film you love quietly disappears from your app, you'll understand it wasn't a glitch and it wasn't an accident. Somewhere, it was a line on a spreadsheet, and the math said you'd never notice. So tell me this in the comments. If a studio can legally erase a finished film from existence to save on taxes, who do these movies actually belong to? The company that owns the paper, or the culture that paid to build them? I genuinely want to know where you land. And if you want to see which beloved classic vanished next and the strange machinery behind it, the next story is already waiting for you, right there on your screen.